And I know it's
Welcome to our sixth session of the kindergarten drop-in. This is our last one for this year because ONlit is done at the end of April. So we are hoping to pick back up again next year and keep working through supporting you with the kindergarten, I was going to say programme code, curriculum. So this is session 6 on la conscience phonemique. And before we get going, I'm going to start with the land acknowledgement. Nous reconnaissons que le travail d'ONlit se déroule sur des territoires autochtones traditionnels. Nous reconnaissons que 46 traités et autres accords couvrent le territoire qui s'appelle aujourd'hui l'Ontario. Nous sommes reconnaissants de pouvoir travailler sur ces terres et nous sommes reconnaissants envers les Premières Nations, aux Métis et aux Inuits pour les soins qu'ils apportent à ces terres, ainsi que les enseignements qu'ils en tirent. Cette reconnaissance nous rappelle nos responsabilités à l'égard de nos relations et des terres ancestrales sur lesquelles nous apprenons, travaillons et vivons. Alors, bienvenue à notre session aujourd'hui. I'm going to pass you over to Angeline to go through some important conscience phonemic learning, and then I'll hop back on and we'll do some questions and answers a little bit later.
Oh, and I did just want to highlight that ONlit is a collaboration between Dyslexia Canada and International Dyslexia Association of Ontario, and also just so grateful to the Ministry of Education for providing the funding to make these sessions possible, and hoping that they will continue to provide funding. I know especially to support French immersion as we navigate some new territory moving forward. So today we're just going to do an overview of what is la conscience phonemique. On va avoir assez de temps pour des questions-réponses et puis partager quelques ressources qui sont disponibles et des événements à venir. Alors, quand on parle de la conscience phonemique et on regarde notre corde de Scarborough, we can see where does that phonological awareness fit? So looking at that bottom strand of the rope, word recognition, that phonological awareness piece. But today's session isn't about that large umbrella of phonological awareness. We are really going to hone in on that phonemic awareness. So knowing that phonological awareness is that larger skill of the sound structures spoken language, whereas phonemic awareness is really a subcomponent of that. So looking at the ability to identify and manipulate the smallest sounds within words, called phonemes, and hoping that in kindergarten students will be able to identify them, notice, segment, blend, and manipulate individual sounds or phonemes in the words, working towards that phonemic awareness, developing that, and knowing that teaching these skills really occurs largely in the context of teaching the decoding, again, that bottom strand of the rope, and spelling of written words. And knowing that phonemic awareness is essential for learning to read and a key indicator of early reading success. Knowing also that it's that ability to not just identify them, but work with those smallest units of sounds and spoken words. And knowing, again, in kindergarten, we hope that students will be able to isolate the phonemes that they hear in words, blend the phonemes from spoken words, and segment them into phonemes. One thing I think that's really important to note is that cross-linguistic transfer. So knowing that some boards are screening in English, or, it's a 50-50 model, knowing that when it comes to phonemic awareness, there's a large amount of cross-linguistic transfer, knowing that those skills, building those skills in whether their home language in English is going to support, but also knowing that sometimes it's a little complicated because some sounds are different. So knowing that is an area that may require support. So determining similarities and differences to ensure that the instruction supports sounds that don't exist in their home language. And I also think it's really important to note here that in English, there are 44 phonemes. In French, there are 36. And some of those I find, especially consonants, there's a lot of similarities there. But also when we talk about vowels, that there's definitely some differences. So thinking of, especially if you're in a 50-50 situation where it's 50% English, 50% French, how might we best support that? So those are I know some conversations, part of the Provincial Early Reading Task Force is looking at those continuum documents, for example, in kindergarten, and what does this look like and sound like in various immersion programs. So thinking about your screener, again, knowing that there is that cross-linguistic transfer and looking at whether your screener is done in English or French, what information can you gather from the screener? So Cadence reading and Cadence reading français both look at first sound fluency as well as phoneme segmentation fluency. EasyCBM looks at that phoneme segmentation, and AimsWeb looks at phoneme segmentation. And my apologies, as nonsense word fluency should not be on that particular spot. I will fix. And then, of course, if we're looking for further information or perhaps at different points throughout the year, if we don't have access to the progress monitoring, knowing that Éclair also has compétences 1 that can help support the assessment of phoneme awareness. And of course, observations throughout the school day. So thinking about the new kindergarten curriculum for 2026 and how it address how we look at phonemic awareness there. So the foundations of language and mathematics strand, knowing that as students progress through kindergarten, we're hoping that they will learn to isolate and blend phonemes and segment simple words into phonemes, identify simple grapheme phoneme correspondences, and read and spell simple words using phonemic awareness and phonics knowledge. And of course, again, depending on your entry point and percentage of French, what will that look like and sound like in English and in French? Or again, I know our board is 100% French, so knowing that we're working towards students being able to do this in French. So looking at the specific skill of isolating phonemes, so knowing that that's where they hear the sounds, the phonemes in words, and they are able to isolate them. So for example, quel est le premier son dans le mot sac? Okay, so c'est an example. And also identifying phonemes within different positions in the word. So for example, on se trouve le son A dans le mot sac, mais où se trouve ce son? Est-ce que c'est dans le milieu, au début, dans le milieu ou à la fin? Où se trouve le son A dans le mot ami? Où se trouve le son A dans le mot la? Ou, par exemple, on peut demander des questions comme quel son entends-tu au début du mot ami, au milieu du mot ami, à la fin du mot ami? Et quand on parle de l'articulation, that's where that sound wall comes into play. And I find it particularly, well, educators have said they found it particularly helpful in a French immersion setting because it's noticing the differences between articulation, particularly for the vowel sounds, for example, the oo versus the u, and also knowing, and also, so for example, p versus or p versus b, je m'excuse. Knowing also that when we do talk about articulation, we want to talk about what is it that we are doing with our mouth, teeth, and tongue. Is it a voice sound or not a voice sound? And is it a continuous or a stop sound? Sorry, Jordan, you made didn't know if, was there something you wanted to add? Okay, I just saw your eyes and I'm like, oh, Jordan, did I do something there? Thanks, you know to stop me anytime. So again, that's where that sound wall comes into play. And we're finding it even helpful, this tool in particular, for older students where they can use it as a spelling tool later on. So again, one thing that you might do, especially in small group instruction, is use mirrors so students can start to begin to talk about that articulation and talking about the voix, les sons voisés ou non voisés et des sons continus ou des sons qui arrêtent. Then we look at blending phonemes. So looking at kindergarten, that students are able to orally blend phonemes to form spoken words, starting with blending 2 or 3 phonemes into a word with a simple syllable structure and progressing to more complex. So this is where the work that we're doing with the Early Reading Task Force will helpfully be supportive because we know when we look at what it looks like there when it talks about VC, CV, CVC, CC, VC, CVCC, that might look a little different in FI. So those are some of the things we're going to look at providing. It will start as a draft, but something that we can work towards what that looks like. But for example, if I say ah, that you know that that's the word sa, and then we move towards oo. So that's the word mouth. And if we start with continuous sounds and then progress to those stop sounds. Then segmenting phonemes, so segmenting spoken words into phonemes. So for example, I say the word la, and the students say la. I say the word sack. Students are able to say sack. So again, this is one area where I know we can segment CV and VC. We know there are a few less CVC words en français, but also looking at knowing that this is, when we talk about phonemic awareness, that we're really talking about what students could do with their eyes closed, but we're going to move on to an important step to take from that phonemic awareness, but knowing that it is that oral component. So this is something that we learned when we were working on Éclair. Well, we had already heard that it applied to English learners and reading, but we weren't sure. I know the researchers wanted to verify that it was actually true for students in French immersion classrooms, and it is actually true that we used to spend a lot of time in that syllable world, I know, but really that the research really confirmed that we want to look at that phonemic awareness, really getting to that phoneme level of instruction, that we know that when we want to look at word recognition, we really don't require students to first gain that syllable segmentation, those skills, so that we really want to begin on that phoneme awareness rather than just the big umbrella. And also really important to begin to link phonemes with graphemes and of course the letter formation as soon as possible. So there is a document there from the International Dyslexia Association that really highlights those pieces. I don't know, MJ, if you're able to drop the links that are in the notes into the chat, that would be really great. The other thing that really came out of this is that there's also a lack of evidence to support oral-only phonemic awareness manipulation activities, because we really do, again, want to integrate them with the print and incorporate letters into phoneme manipulation tasks to enhance the awareness of those phonemes and to really get that letter sound correspondence moving along. And I know that that's highlighted in the FAQ from the UFly in Ontario Kindergarten that really looks at, should I use an oral only awareness program with year ones and a phonics program like UFly or Sonograph or any of the other explicit systematic resources out there for that letter grapheme phoneme correspondence, or an oral only phonological awareness with everyone for part of the year beginning phonics instruction. So really appreciate that they took the time to answer this, and of course knowing that the response is based on that research. Okay, just wanted to take a moment to just share one of the shorts. I know ONLit's been doing a lot of work and has a lot of these available en anglais et en français, so my apologies for bumping that too quickly.
La conscience phonémique, c'est important en maternelle et jardin d'enfants. Mais concrètement, qu'est-ce qu'on enseigne? Et est-ce qu'on a vraiment besoin d'un programme à part? Bonjour, je m'appelle Michel et voici l'essentiel sur le programme cadre de la maternelle et du jardin d'enfants. Maintenant, c'est beaucoup plus clair qu'avant. On s'attend à ce que les élèves puissent isoler des phonèmes, fusionner et segmenter des mots simples en phonèmes. Et là, on se demande pourquoi se concentrer seulement sur ces compétences? Parce que les phonèmes, ce sont les plus petites unités de son qui sont étroitement liées aux lettres en lecture et en écriture. Comme dans le mot sac, S-A-C. C'est exactement ce dont les élèves ont besoin pour décoder et orthographier. Oui, bien sûr, travailler avec les syllabes est utile, mais ce n'est pas ce qui a le plus d'impact direct sur la lecture et l'écriture. Une autre question qu'on entend souvent, est-ce qu'on doit enseigner la conscience phonémique séparément de la phonétique? Honnêtement, dans la plupart des cas, non. Ces pratiques peuvent et devraient être intégrées directement à l'enseignement des correspondances graphème-phonème. Mettre en place un programme à part tous les jours en parallèle d'un enseignement structuré des correspondances graphème-phonème, ce n'est généralement pas nécessaire. Et honnêtement, ça peut même nuire à d'autres apprentissages essentiels. L'idée, c'est de garder cela simple, clair et efficace. Cibler les compétences au niveau du phonème qui ont le plus d'impact direct sur la lecture et l'écriture. Envie de savoir plus? Visitez ONlit.org. On est là pour vous accompagner.
So again, ONlit has several of those short videos available on their YouTube channel, and I do find they're quite helpful. So again, when we're talking about phonemic awareness in the kindergarten classroom, knowing that we need to be explicit and intentional and directly teach these things and don't just expect students to magically pick them up and understand what they are, knowing that that short, focused daily instruction is most effective, using that I do, we do, you do model, and looking at beginning with 2 sounds, moving on to 3 sounds, starting with simple, building that complexity, integrating with phonics, as was mentioned. So we're not teaching in the dark, but with the lights on so that students can see that articulation and make those connections. Connect sound work to letters. For example, I'm not just hearing but connecting to the letter M. And teaching phonemes along with that letter name and letter formation, knowing that that supports students' development of phonemic awareness. And of course, continuing to observe and respond using the continuum documents. And again, we are hoping to provide you with some supports for those continuum documents for French immersion settings specifically, noticing where students are and planning next steps. So of course, when we talk about that modèle d'enseignement, we really want to use that je fais, nous faisons, vous faites, ce modèle. Alors, on commence avec voici une mitaine. Et les premiers sont dans le mot mitaine. Disons-le ensemble. Mitaine. Quel est le premier son que vous entendez dans le mot mitaine? And if the students all say t, we're going to go back and redo because we're really aiming for that perfected practice. Thinking of that Anita Archer, one of those Archerisms, really working towards that perfection and supporting that. Looking at when we want to put this into practice, some of the supports that we can use to just make those sounds visible. And there's a great article, a blog post from ONlit again. And MJ, I don't know if you could drop that in the chat. It's in the link there. Just looking at some of those supports that we can use to make sounds visible. So we can use Alconin boxes. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Using our bodies, especially for some students, that just being able to get up and move, especially in kindergarten, we know that movement really just sometimes helps supports the student learning. Beginning with simple words. So for example, with 2 phonemes, so and then moving on to 3, and then moving on to more complex sounds, then being able to really connect rapidly to those letters. And of course, working with word chains, knowing that those to support décodage et encodage. And I know that's a really important part of step 6 of sonograph is really going between transitioning from encodage to décodage, décodage, working to support those connections for students. One other thing that's really important is that phonation continue. So au lieu de dire a, on veut dire a, pour aider les élèves à fusionner et quand ils doivent segmenter les mots, que ça va leur aider beaucoup. Alors, où se trouve la conscience phonemique pendant la journée? So thinking about, we're going to just go through the flow of the day and remember that there is flexibility and fluidity in the flow of the day. These are just a couple of examples, but knowing also that in 2000, and that seems so far ago now, but knowing that is the research that a lot of the science of reading was based from, is the National Reading Panel found that in a kindergarten year, a total of 18 hours of phonemic awareness provides maximum results. So that's not saying that more is going to help more. 18 hours is maximum results, which ends up being about 6 minutes a day total, just to kind of break that down for you. And knowing that that is phonemic awareness in multiple ways. So some of the ways that we can support phonemic awareness, and I want to go back to this from session 3, and thanks to Nikki for her support in that, is looking at some activities we might be able to use pour isoler, par exemple, quel est le premier, je vois quelque chose qui commence avec le son S, et les élèves vont choisir cela. Segmenter, on peut sauter et dire fusionner, on peut utiliser Simon dit pour fusionner les mots. Alors voilà quelques exemples qu'on peut faire pendant nos transitions. Et I know that we try to minimize our transitions throughout the day, but we know that in kindergarten, particularly when we're moving through schedules, there are just necessary times for transition. Then looking at just a group entier. So this is just the example of what it looks like for the 2 days of a sonograph lesson. So thinking about all of the places that the La Conscience Phonemique fits through here. So knowing that, yes, there's that explicit blending and segmenting, but also that the phonemic awareness skills are definitely required for fusionner et le travail de mots, and then, of course, looking at the texte connecté. So knowing that that is a big component of that. And some of the ways that we can make those connections through play are perhaps sorting by first sound. So there may be specific vocabulary that you're working on. I know beginning of the year, September, oftentimes we had a lot of conversations about les couleurs. So if we look at the premier son, how can we sort these by their first sound? So rouge et rose, et vert et violet. Puis on peut utiliser des images. So I know oftentimes kindergarten, sometimes we like to get really excited about different animals. And so this is just an example. Voici une girafe et un lion. Quel mot commence avec vous? You noticed I gave them the vocabulary because I can't expect them to always remember that that's a girafe et un lion. So I'm giving them the words first, but also working towards sharing that vocabulary with them and hoping that they will acquire it through exposure to the words. And then, quel son entends-tu au début du mot girafe? Then we can always use a tête, taille, orteil. So, sac. Sorry, you can't see me touch my toes, but they're down there. Quel son entends-tu au milieu du mot sac? Sac. Ah. So, on peut faire cela. Et là, on va bouger aussi. Oh, of course, we want to take that learning outdoors. So how might we maybe even jump from hula hoop to hula hoop, saying the different sounds in a word? And I know even I have seen, kicking a ball with pylons and trying to find the right word. So just multiple ways that we can bring that learning, that phonemic awareness outside. I know a lot of the activities we looked at for transition could also be supported outdoors. Then connecting to that small group instruction. So reflecting back on, I know that ONlit had a book talk, and MJ, if you want to drop the book talk link into the chat, I'd be really grateful. So looking at that book talk and this general, this is the template from Next Steps in Literacy instruction. What are some ways that we might be able to support that phonemic awareness when we're looking at segmenting phonemes? We can teach them how to segment phonemes, teach them how to blend phonemes, teach the sound and the name of letters. When we're looking at reconnaître le premier son, and sorry, I should have said those in the reverse order, because I know, like, when we're talking about progress monitoring and éclair, we really want to get to that premier son and then that segmenting. So we really want to teach the sound of the letters, teaching that segmenting and blending, and then looking at the décodage. Here's an example of this in practice. Maybe not. Oh. I think Jordan and I were saying that we had some funny tech things today, so that could I'm not going to restart my device, but this is just an example from our Building Competent and Engaged Readers resource that can be found on Transforming FSL. And it's just a video of an educator working through some small group instruction, and all they're doing is she's saying, il faut fusionner I, E, et les élèves vont dire il. Et puis, ils vont continuer avec les couleurs et tout cela. Désolé que ça fonctionne pas. Je vais essayer une autre fois. Non. Mais désolé. Mais on continue. Or not. They won't even go to the next slide. That's fine. All right. There we are. Okay. Oops. Okay. So One other thing that I know working with speech language pathologists that I love to do, that they taught me was the tap it, map it, graph it technique. And I think we have to think about each learner and where they are, because you may have a student that is just at tap it, right? So I'm going to say the mot ravi. And actually, if they were just at tap it, I might be at the word la, and the students are going to go ah. And note that if you are, especially for whole group instruction, if you're doing the phoneme fist, that you really want to make sure you're going the way that they would read. And I'm hoping on my screen it doesn't flip me around, because from my perspective, it's the right way. But where they're, so first you're tapping it, and I know we can do pound and sound also, but I really like the phoneme fist, especially for small group instructions. So we can go a, v, e. So then we're going to take we're going to use that phoneme fist and show the students a, v, e. And the students are going to, we are very fortunate, but I think you can do it with so many movable objects. You could even do it with little rocks outside if you have little rocks. If you don't have little rocks, you might have something else. But just using a little object, and this is actually a 10 frame in this case, but we have magnetic chips and wands. So we're just using that, and we're going a, v, e. And then again, you want to set this up to help the student progress and develop, but this might be where a student is, but we really, as soon as possible, want to get to making those connections to the graphemes or the letters. So if it's, I know sometimes it's very challenging to have students begin printing, but we do want to get there. But if we need to start with letter magnets, we could, or little grapheme tiles, we could use them, and they're going to map those graphemes to the chips. So they're ravi. And then of course, as soon as students are ready, or maybe it's even just writing that first letter, if it's a real challenge to get them to print, but we want to focus on getting them to printing when they can, is they're going to print the word, and then using that magnetic wand, they can move along those magnetic chips and read the word and say ravi. One thing I know you'll see a roll and read here, because really want to be intentional about the words we're picking when we're doing this, particularly for small group instruction. So it could be that many of my students, I'm working with my whole class on lesson 23, but I noted that this small group of students really needs a little bit more support with the v sound. So I'm pulling the words from the roll and read from lesson 18 to come up with the words. I don't have to reinvent them, because I know that they've learned these grapheme phoneme connections already, and so that I'm able to use those words to support there. And of course, progress monitoring. We always want to make sure we're monitoring the skill we're teaching and knowing. For those of you using Acadience Reading Français, they do have the first sound fluency and the phoneme segmentation fluency that really help us support. But again, using that observation conversation, working with students to help you understand where students are in their learning. All right, we're on the question-réponse déjà.